I came home after 3 months overseas to find a sparkling new pool in my neighbor's backyard. Beautiful, right? Except half of it was sitting on my property. When I confronted them, they just smiled and said, "Too late now, it's already built." That smile disappeared real fast when the bulldozers showed up. "My name's Marcus, and let me take you back to where this nightmare began." The flight from Singapore had been brutal. 15 hours, cramped in economy, dealing with crying babies and turbulence that had my knuckles white on the armrests. All I wanted was to collapse into my own bed, in my own house, and sleep for about 3 days straight. My contracting job had kept me away for 3 months, working on a massive infrastructure project that had finally wrapped up. The pay was incredible, but being away from home for that long takes its toll. I missed my own space, my own routine, even my own coffee maker. As the Uber pulled onto my street that warm September afternoon, everything looked normal at first. Same mailboxes lined up like soldiers, same oak trees that had been there for probably 50 years, same Mrs. Peterson walking her ancient beagle, who moved about as fast as continental drift. Then we turned into my driveway, and I saw something that made my jet-lagged brain do a double take. My neighbor's backyard had completely transformed. Where there used to be just grass, a few struggling rose bushes, and a rusty old swing set, there now sat an enormous in-ground pool. And I mean, enormous. This wasn't some above-ground summer special from the hardware store. This was a full luxury in-ground pool, complete with a stone deck that looked like it belonged at a resort, a waterfall feature that probably cost more than my car, and professional landscaping with palm trees and everything. It was the kind of setup you'd see in magazines about luxury outdoor living spaces or on those house renovation shows where they reveal the backyard and everyone gasps. "Man, that's a nice pool," the Uber driver commented as I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk, still staring at the transformation. "Your neighbors must have spent a fortune on that thing." "Yeah," I muttered, unable to look away. Something felt off about the whole situation, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what was bothering me. Maybe it was just the surprise of it all, or maybe it was the jet lag making me paranoid. I paid the driver, added a decent tip, and hauled my luggage up to my front door, fumbling with keys I hadn't used in 3 months. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it, which was a relief. My elderly neighbor, Mr. Chen, from across the street, had been collecting my mail like he'd promised. Bless that man, he'd even watered my plants, and they actually looked healthier than when I'd left. The pile of mail on my kitchen counter was substantial. 3 months' worth of everything from bills to credit card offers to local community newsletters. Among all the usual stuff, there were several official-looking envelopes from the county building department. I set them aside, telling myself I'd deal with them after I got some sleep. Big mistake. But hindsight is 20/20. After a quick shower that felt like heaven after airplane bathroom sink washing, I finally fell into my own bed. But even as exhausted as I was, I couldn't stop thinking about that pool. My bedroom window faced the backyard, and I could see it clearly from where I lay, the evening sun reflecting off the water making it look even more impressive. The more I looked at it, the more something gnawed at the back of my mind. The positioning seemed wrong. Really wrong. It looked too close to my side, but I was so tired I couldn't think straight enough to process why that bothered me so much. When I woke up the next morning, it was almost noon. I'd slept for 14 hours straight, and my body still felt like it was in 3 different time zones at once. But that nagging feeling about the pool was even stronger now. The first thing I did, even before making coffee, was grab the property survey from my file cabinet. Every homeowner should have one of these. It's literally a map that shows exactly where your property lines are, marked by a licensed surveyor. I'd gotten mine when I bought the house 5 years ago, and it had been sitting in that drawer ever since, never needed until this exact moment. I took the survey outside, my heart already starting to pound, even though I wasn't sure why yet. Standing at the fence line between my property and my neighbor's yard, I held up the survey and started comparing the landmarks. The old oak tree that had been there forever there on the survey, there in real life. The corner of my shed there on the survey, there in real life. The property markers, Small metal posts, driven into the ground that you'd miss if you weren't looking for them there on the survey. And after some digging around in the grass, there, in real life. Then I started measuring, using my phone's measuring app and good old-fashioned pacing, walking the line with my survey in hand. That gnawing feeling in my stomach turned into a full-blown lead weight. The pool wasn't just close to my property line. It crossed it, by a lot. I measured again, then a third time, because I literally could not believe what I was seeing. According to my survey and the physical markers I'd found, at least 10 feet of that pool, maybe more, was sitting squarely on my property. The entire deep end, the fancy waterfall feature, and a significant chunk of that expensive stone decking were on my land. Not close to the line, not straddling it fully on my side, on property I owned and paid taxes on. I stood there in my backyard, staring at this massive pool that had invaded my property, trying to process what I was looking at. How does someone build a pool and not check property lines first? That's like step one of any construction project, right? How does a professional contractor let this happen? They're supposed to know better. And more importantly, how did this entire thing happen while I was gone and nobody thought to contact me? Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment below if you've ever come home to find your neighbor did something crazy to your property. I want to hear your stories, because this can't just happen to me, right? My neighbors, the Hendersons, had moved in about 2 years ago. We'd never been particularly close, but we'd been cordial enough. The kind of neighbors where you wave when you're both getting the mail, have the occasional chat about whether this weather is crazy or what, and maybe mention when you're going out of town so someone can keep an eye on things. Nothing deep, but friendly enough. Greg Henderson was a real estate agent, one of those guys who was always dressed business casual and talking about prime properties and investment opportunities whenever you ran into him. His wife, Marissa, was equally status conscious, always posting on social media about their latest purchases, their trips, their perfect life. I'd never paid much attention to it, but now I was thinking about how they'd probably been posting pool pictures for weeks while I was overseas. I took a deep breath, told myself to stay calm and professional, and walked over to their front door. It was around 1 in the afternoon on a Thursday, so I wasn't sure if anyone would be home, but I could see Marissa's white BMW in the driveway. I rang the doorbell and waited, my property survey clutched in my hand like evidence at a crime scene. Marissa answered, after about 30 seconds, wearing designer workout clothes that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. Everything about her screamed, "I have money, and I want you to know it." Her smile was bright and artificial, the kind you perfect when you spend your life pretending everything is Instagram-worthy and your life is a highlight reel. "Oh my God, Marcus, you're back. How was Singapore? I saw on the neighborhood Facebook that you were working overseas. That must have been so exciting." "It was fine, yeah. Good experience," I said, trying to keep my voice level and not launch directly into accusations. "Listen, I need to talk to you and Greg about your pool. Is he home?" Her smile got even brighter, if that was possible. "Isn't it gorgeous? Greg surprised me with it while you were gone. It was supposed to be for our anniversary, but he couldn't wait. Cost a fortune, but it's absolutely worth it. We've been in it almost every day. You should come over for a pool party once we get everything finished. We're planning a big one for Labor Day weekend. Marissa, I really need you to get Greg. Now. There's a serious problem with the pool." Her smile finally faltered. Confusion, replacing the artificial cheerfulness. "What kind of problem? Is something wrong with our equipment? Is it too loud or something? Just please get Greg. This needs to be discussed with both of you." 10 minutes later, I was standing in their backyard with both of them, feeling like I was about to ruin someone's day but knowing I had to do it. My property survey was spread out on their expensive patio table, and I was pointing out the markers and measurements, trying to explain this as calmly and clearly as possible. Greg's face had gone through several emotions, in rapid succession: confused, then annoyed, then something harder to read. Defensive, maybe, or calculating. "Look," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. I'm not trying to cause problems or ruin your pool or anything like that. But, according to my property survey, about 10 feet of your pool is on my property. Maybe more. This is a serious issue that needs to be addressed. Greg crossed his arms over his chest, and I could see his jaw tighten. That can't be right. We had the contractor check everything before they started digging. They wouldn't have made a mistake like that. Did you get an actual professional survey done before construction? His silence told me everything I needed to know. After a few seconds, he said, "The contractor said he knew where the property lines were. He's been doing this for 20 years. But, did you get a licensed surveyor out here with GPS equipment and official measurements? Because that's what you're supposed to do for any major construction, especially something like an in-ground pool." More silence. Marissa was looking between us, her face pale now, probably doing the math in her head about what this might mean for their expensive new pool. "Greg, I'm looking at the county property survey right here. See this oak tree? It's marked right here on the survey. See the corner of my shed? That's a landmark point too. The property line runs right here. Through this line of trees and along this fence. Your pool crosses it significantly. I'm not making this up or trying to scam you. This is official documentation." Greg's expression had hardened into something almost aggressive. "We paid $60,000 for this pool. $60,000. It's done. It's built. The concrete is poured. The plumbing is installed. The decking is finished. We're not tearing it up because of some survey that might be old or outdated. This survey is from when I bought my house 5 years ago. Property lines don't change unless there's a legal transfer or adjustment, which there hasn't been. And I'm not asking you to tear up the whole thing. I'm saying we need to address the part that's on my property. Maybe you can adjust the property line through a legal agreement, or we can work out some kind of solution, but you can't just build on my land without permission and expect me to be okay with it." "It's already built," Greg repeated, his voice getting harder. "What do you want us to do, dig it up? Do you know how much that would cost? It's done. It's finished. You weren't even here. Being gone doesn't mean I gave up my property rights. Would you be okay if I built something on your land while you were on vacation?" "That's different," Marissa jumped in. "You were gone for 3 months. You weren't using that part of your yard. Nobody even noticed or cared. Can't you just let it go? Be a good neighbor about this?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They'd built on my property without permission, and now they wanted me to just accept it because addressing it would be inconvenient for them. Be a good neighbor? You built on my property without asking, without checking, without any permission whatsoever. And now, you want me to just accept it because fixing your mistake would be expensive? "It's not a mistake," Greg said firmly. "It's a misunderstanding at most. The contractor made an error. These things happen. Then the contractor needs to fix it, or you do. This isn't my problem to just absorb." "It's done," Marissa repeated, and I could hear tears starting in her voice. "We can't afford to move it or rebuild it. This was our dream pool. Can't you work with us here? We're neighbors. We have to live next to each other." I looked at both of them. These people who'd violated my property rights and were now trying to make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. "Get a professional survey done," I said as calmly as I could manage. "If I'm wrong, I'll apologize, and we can forget this whole thing. But if I'm right, and I know I am, we need to fix this properly." "That's not unreasonable." Greg took a step closer to me, and for a second I thought he might actually try to physically intimidate me. At 6'2", Greg had a few inches on me, but I wasn't backing down. "We're not paying for a survey, and we're not moving the pool. If you have a problem with it, sue us." He actually said that. "Sue us, if you want." Like he was daring me. Like he thought I wouldn't actually do it. Like he thought he could bully me into backing down. I walked back to my house, my hands shaking with anger and adrenaline. That night, I barely slept, thinking about the situation and what my options were. In the morning, I started making calls. I contacted 3 different surveying companies that first day. The first one could schedule me in 2 weeks. The second said they were booked solid for a month, which felt like forever when I was this angry. The third company, Bennett Surveying, said they could squeeze me in that Friday for a rush fee. I didn't even ask how much the rush fee was. I didn't care. I needed answers. I needed official documentation, and I needed it fast. While I waited for Friday, I did my homework like my life depended on it. I pulled up county records online, researched property law in my state for hours, and documented absolutely everything I could. I took dozens of photos from every possible angle, wide shots, showing the whole pool, close-ups of where it crossed into my yard, shots with my property survey visible in the frame. I created a detailed timeline of events, noting the exact dates I'd left for Singapore, when I'd returned, when I'd first noticed the pool, when I'd confronted the Hendersons. I even talked to other neighbors, gathering witness statements about when the construction had happened. Mrs. Peterson, who lived 2 houses down and had probably seen every piece of neighborhood drama in her 70-plus years, had plenty to say when I knocked on her door. "Oh, Marcus, honey, they were out there every single day with all those construction trucks. Made such a racket starting at 7 in the morning. Drilling, digging, concrete trucks backing up with that beeping. I wondered if they'd gotten permission from you, since it looked so close to your side of the property line. I even mentioned it to Harold, that's my husband, that it seemed awfully close to your yard. Even Mr. Chen, who'd been watching my house while I was gone, mentioned he'd thought the positioning looked odd. Marcus, I'm not good with these things," he said in his careful English, "but it seemed very close. I thought maybe you and them had talked about it before you left. I didn't want to interfere." I assured him he hadn't done anything wrong, that he couldn't have known. As I dug deeper into county records, I discovered something that made the situation even worse. The Hendersons had never pulled a permit for the pool. Not one single permit. In our county, any in-ground pool construction requires multiple permits, inspections at various stages, and yes, an official property survey to ensure setback requirements from property lines are met. It's all right there in the building code, clear as day. They'd skipped every single step of the legal process. They'd just hired a contractor and built whatever they wanted without any oversight or approval. That explained why none of those letters from the county building department that were in my mail pile had been forwarded to me. They'd been notices about unpermitted construction, but by the time they arrived, it was already done. If you're enjoying this story of justice being served, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you would have done in my situation. Would you have tried to compromise or gone straight to court? Friday finally came, and the surveyor arrived right on time. Linda Ramirez was a woman in her mid-50s, with 30 years of experience in land surveying. According to her company website, she had 2 assistants with her, and they brought equipment that looked like something from a sci-fi movie: GPS units with antennas, laser measuring devices, laptops connected to county database systems. They spent 3 full hours taking measurements, using GPS coordinates, checking and rechecking county records, examining the old survey markers, and taking notes. When Linda finally finished and called me over to look at her tablet, her expression was serious. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I'd given her my last name when I hired her. You're right. And unfortunately, it's actually worse than you initially thought. They're 12 feet over the property line at the deepest point of the pool, and the stone deck extends another 3 feet beyond that. We're talking about 15 feet of total encroachment at maximum depth, tapering down to about 8 feet at the shallow end. This is significant. My property was being stolen. 15 feet of it at the worst point, covered by a pool I'd never approved, never even knew was being built until it was finished. What are my options here? I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Linda had clearly been through situations like this before. Legally, you have every right to demand complete removal of any structure on your property. They built without your permission, without permits, and without proper survey. In fact, I'd say this is one of the clearest encroachment cases I've seen in years. Usually, there's at least some gray area, but this is black and white. That same day, I called the property attorney I'd been researching, Robert Carlson. He was a specialist in property disputes, with a whole section of his website dedicated to boundary issues and encroachment cases. When I explained my situation over the phone, he said he could meet with me Monday morning, and that I should bring every piece of documentation I had. That weekend was torture. I could hear the Hendersons using their pool, laughing, music playing, having a great time on property that partially belonged to me. Part of me wanted to march over there and tell them what the survey had found, but Robert had told me not to communicate with them anymore without him present. Monday morning, I sat in Robert Carlson's office, with all my documentation spread across his conference table. He was exactly what I'd hoped for, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with the kind of presence that suggested he didn't back down from fights. He reviewed every photo, every document, both surveys, my timeline, the witness statements, the county records showing no permits had been pulled. He took his time, making notes, occasionally asking questions. After about 45 minutes, he sat back in his chair and nodded. "Marcus, you've done excellent work here," he said. "Seriously, I wish all my clients came in this prepared. Photos, professional survey, timeline, witnesses, permit violations. The fact that they didn't pull any permits is really the nail in the coffin here. The county building department is going to be very interested in this." "How long will something like this take?" I asked. "In cases this clear-cut, where the encroachment is documented, significant, and they've already refused to remedy it, we could potentially see a resolution in 3 to 6 months, maybe faster if we get a good court date. We'll file a civil suit for encroachment and seek injunctive relief to force removal, plus damages for the violation and your legal costs. The judge will likely order their own court-appointed survey just to cross every T and dot every I, but that's standard procedure. And you think we'll win?" Robert looked at me with the confidence of someone who'd fought these battles many times before. "Barring some absolutely bizarre circumstance I can't foresee? Yes, this is as solid a case as it gets. They built on your land without permission. End of story." We drafted a certified letter together that afternoon, formal and professional, but leaving no room for misunderstanding. It included a copy of Linda's official survey, clearly showed the encroachment with measurements and GPS coordinates, explained the legal violations, and requested they remove the portion on my property within 30 days or we'd proceed with legal action. Robert hand-delivered it to their house the next day to ensure they received it. Their response came exactly 1 week later, not from Greg or Marissa directly, but from their attorney. The letter was full of legal language, but it boiled down to 3 main points. They disputed the survey's accuracy. Despite having no counter-evidence, they claimed something called adverse possession, which Robert immediately laughed at, since they'd only lived there 2 years, and adverse possession requires much longer time frames. And they refused to remove anything. The letter concluded by essentially saying, "See you in court." That's when I knew this was going to go the distance. Some people, when confronted with clear evidence that they're wrong, will at least try to find a compromise. The Hendersons had chosen to dig in and fight. Robert filed the lawsuit the following Monday. Civil suit for property encroachment, seeking injunctive relief to force removal. Compensatory damages for the unauthorized use of my property, and recovery of all legal costs, including survey fees and attorney fees. The filing was thick, full of exhibits, both surveys, photos, witness statements, county records, the timeline, everything. The months that followed were some of the most uncomfortable of my life. The Hendersons used their pool constantly that summer, throwing parties every weekend, posting pictures all over social media of their perfect backyard oasis, their dream pool, their summer paradise. The photos showed up on Facebook, Instagram, even TikTok videos of Marissa doing some kind of pool workout routine. Meanwhile, I couldn't even fully use 15 feet of my own property because their illegal construction was blocking it. Greg and Marissa went out of their way to be hostile once they'd been served with the lawsuit. pool parties started going until midnight, sometimes 1 in the morning, with music loud enough that I could feel the bass through my bedroom walls. They positioned their speakers to directly face my house, which seemed intentionally antagonistic. One time I asked them to keep it down at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, a work night, and Greg actually called the police, claiming I was harassing them. The police officer who showed up, a guy about my age, who looked exhausted by the whole situation, just asked everyone to keep it reasonable and gave me a sympathetic look as he left. They even put up a privacy fence along the property line, probably to make it harder for me to see or photograph their pool, but all it did was make the encroachment even more obvious, since the fence had to jog around where the pool crossed onto my property. But I had something they didn't have: the law on my side, patience, and the moral high ground. Every hostile act just gave me more documentation about their behavior. The court-appointed surveyor came out about 2 months into the process, a requirement to ensure complete impartiality. This surveyor was even more thorough than Linda had been, spending an entire day taking measurements, checking historical records, examining property markers, going back decades. When his report came back 3 weeks later, it confirmed everything Linda had found: 12 to 15 feet of encroachment, depending on the location. No permits pulled. No permission sought. Textbook property violation with aggravating factors, including the defendant's refusal to remedy after being notified. The court date was set for early December, about 5.5 months after I'd first filed. Robert prepared me for what to expect: the formality of the courtroom, how to answer questions if I was called to testify, what the judge would be looking for. He was confident, but made sure I understood that nothing was guaranteed until the gavel came down. The morning of the court date, I put on my best suit, the one I usually saved for major client presentations, and shaved carefully. Robert met me outside the courthouse, looking calm and collected with his leather briefcase and perfectly pressed suit. "Remember," he said as we walked in, "stay calm, answer honestly if you're asked anything, and let me do most of the talking." The courtroom was smaller than I expected from watching legal dramas on TV, more like a large conference room with wood paneling and the judge's bench at the front. Judge Martha Reynolds presided, a woman in her mid-60s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and glasses that she peered over when looking at documents. Robert had researched her. She had a reputation for being fair, but having absolutely no tolerance for people who thought rules didn't apply to them. The Hendersons showed up with their attorney, a guy named Bradley Morrison, who looked uncomfortable from the moment he walked in. Throughout the preliminary proceedings, he kept shuffling papers, avoiding eye contact, checking his watch. Robert had done his homework on Morrison too. He was relatively inexperienced in property law, normally handled real estate transactions. The Hendersons had probably hired him because Greg knew him from the real estate business, which was not a great strategy when you need a specialist. Robert presented our case first, and he was masterful. He walked Judge Reynolds through everything methodically: the timeline of events, the photos showing the encroachment from multiple angles, both professional surveys which agreed completely on the measurements, the witness statements from neighbors who confirmed the construction happened while I was overseas, the county record showing absolutely no permits had been pulled for the construction. He presented it all like building blocks, each piece of evidence stacking on the previous one until you had an undeniable tower of facts. "Your Honor," Robert said, his voice carrying that perfect balance of passion and professionalism, "this is as straightforward as property cases get. The defendants constructed a major structure without permits, without proper survey, without any permission whatsoever on the plaintiff's land. Not close to the line, on the land, by as much as 15 feet at certain points. Mr. Hayes was informed of the violation multiple times, provided them with professional survey results from licensed surveyors, and they refused to remedy the situation. They left him with no choice but to seek relief from this court. The law is clear on this matter, and the facts are undisputed." Morrison's defense was painful to watch, and I almost felt bad for the guy, except for what he was defending. He tried to argue that I'd somehow given implied consent by being away, which made no legal sense. Being overseas for work doesn't mean you've abandoned your property rights. He tried to suggest the surveys might be wrong, despite having no counter-evidence and 2 independent professional surveys agreeing. He even tried the emotional angle, talking about how the Hendersons had invested their life savings in this pool, as if spending money on an illegal structure made it okay. Then Morrison made what Robert later told me was a catastrophic mistake. He argued that removing the pool would cause undue hardship to his clients because of the cost and because they'd built it in good faith. Judge Reynolds stopped writing notes, put down her pen very deliberately, and looked up over her glasses. The courtroom got very quiet. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that told you someone was about to get dressed down. "Are you seriously arguing undue hardship when your clients chose to build without permits, without survey, and without permission?" Morrison opened his mouth, clearly trying to figure out how to answer that. "Let me ask your clients some direct questions," Judge Reynolds continued, turning to Greg and Marissa. "Mr. Henderson, please stand. Did you obtain a property survey before building this pool?" Greg stood up, looking less confident than I'd ever seen him. "No, Your Honor. But we trusted our contractor to. Yes or no, Mr. Henderson? Did you obtain a survey?" "No, Your Honor." "Did you pull the required county permits for this construction?" Greg shifted his weight, and I could see a flush creeping up his neck. "Our contractor said he would handle." "Mr. Henderson, did you, as the property owner, verify that permits were pulled?" "It's your property, your responsibility." "No, Your Honor." "Did you at any point ask your neighbor for permission to build on their property?" "It wasn't supposed to be on their property, Your Honor." "We thought the contractor knew, but you didn't verify. You didn't check. You didn't do your due diligence. It wasn't a question. And when you were informed of the encroachment with professional survey results, you refused to address it. Is that correct?" Greg looked at his attorney for help, but Morrison seemed to have given up. "The pool was already built, Your Honor. We couldn't afford to just—" "You couldn't afford to follow the law?" Judge Reynolds' voice was sharp now. "You couldn't afford to respect property boundaries that have been legally established and recorded? You couldn't afford to obtain proper permits like every other homeowner in this county is required to do?" The silence in that courtroom was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat. Judge Reynolds spent another few minutes reviewing the surveys one more time, comparing them side by side on her bench. Then she took off her glasses, looked at both parties, and spoke. "I find in favor of the plaintiff. The evidence is overwhelming and undisputed by any credible source. The defendants constructed a swimming pool that encroaches on the plaintiff's property by 12 to 15 feet at various points, without permits, without survey, and without permission. This is not a gray area. This is not a dispute over inches or a questionable property marker. This is significant encroachment onto private property, compounded by multiple violations of county building codes and a refusal to remedy the situation when confronted." She looked directly at the Hendersons over her reading glasses, and her expression was stern. "The defendants are hereby ordered to remove all structures encroaching on the plaintiff's property within 60 days from today's date. This includes the portion of the pool, decking, waterfall feature, and any landscaping that crosses the property line. The defendants will also pay the plaintiff's legal fees, survey costs, and damages for the unauthorized use of their property. I'm setting damages at $5,000, which I consider generous, given the duration of the violation and the defendant's refusal to cooperate." Morrison stood up quickly. "Your Honor, if we could request an extension on the timeline." 60 days, Mr. Morrison. That's more than reasonable given the circumstances. If the structures are not removed by then, I'll authorize the plaintiff to have them removed at the defendant's expense, and I'll add contempt of court charges on top of everything else. This court does not tolerate property violations, especially when the violators have shown such blatant disregard for their neighbors' rights and the law itself. I'm also ordering the defendants to immediately apply for all permits they should have obtained in the first place, and to pay any fines the county building department assesses for the unpermitted construction." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo in the small courtroom. It was over. I'd won. If you're still watching, Drop a comment telling me whether you think the Hendersons got what they deserved or if I should have been more lenient. And make sure you're subscribed to Karma's Echo for more stories where justice actually wins. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt like I could finally breathe properly for the first time in months. Robert shook my hand. Professional but clearly pleased. That went exactly as I hoped it would. Judge Reynolds did not hold back. The next 60 days were interesting in the way that watching a slow-motion disaster is interesting. The Hendersons tried to appeal the decision, but their own lawyer told them it was pointless. The case was too clear-cut. The judge's ruling was well supported by law and evidence, and frankly, an appeal would cost them more money with essentially zero chance of success. Morrison actually withdrew as their attorney after that, apparently not wanting to continue representing them. They tried to negotiate with me directly, showing up at my door with Marissa crying and Greg looking defeated. They offered to buy the 15 feet of property, proposed paying me rent for the land, even suggested splitting the cost of removing the encroachment portion if I'd agree to let some of it stay. I refused all of it. They'd had their chance to handle this properly, to work with me, to respect the law. That time had passed the moment Greg told me to sue him if I had a problem with it. Well, I'd sued him, and I'd won, and now they had to face the consequences of their choices. What they'd stolen wasn't about the money, it was about respect, boundaries, and following the rules that everyone else has to follow. You don't get to bully your way onto someone's property and then buy your way out when you get caught. That's not how property rights work. And it's not how being a decent human being works. Greg even tried intimidation one final time, cornering me at my mailbox on a Saturday morning. "You're really going to make us destroy a $60,000 pool?" His face was red, his fists clenched, and he stepped into my personal space. I looked him right in the eye and didn't back down an inch. "You really built a $60,000 pool without checking property lines? This isn't about me making you do anything, Greg. A judge ordered it because you violated the law and refused to make it right. You did this to yourself." He stood there, mouth opening and closing like he wanted to say something, but he had nothing left. All his bluster, all his confidence, all his certainty that he could just do whatever he wanted, gone. He turned and walked away without another word. On day 58 of the 60-day deadline, the demolition crew arrived. I'd taken the day off work specifically to be there. I wasn't going to miss this for anything in the world. Maybe that makes me petty, and honestly, I was okay with that. I needed to see this through to the absolute end, to watch justice being physically carried out. The Hendersons had apparently left town, probably unable to stomach watching their expensive mistake get undone. Their house was dark, their cars gone. Maybe they'd gone to stay with family. Maybe they just couldn't face it. The crew chief, a weathered guy named Mike who looked like he'd been in construction since before I was born, stood with me looking at the pool before they started. He shook his head slowly. 30 years I've been doing this, he said, and I still can't understand how people build major structures without checking property lines first. That's literally step one. How do you skip step one? You'd think it would be common sense, I agreed. You'd think? You the homeowner? Yeah, Marcus Hayes. This is my property they built on. Well, Mr. Hayes, we're going to make it right today. They started with the stone decking, using jackhammers to break up the expensive decorative stonework that extended onto my property. Each piece that came up felt like a small victory. Then the real show began: the excavator. This massive yellow machine positioned itself carefully at the property line, and the operator, who handled the controls with the precision of a surgeon, began breaking into the pool wall right at the boundary. It was oddly satisfying in a way I didn't expect, watching that bright blue interior get torn apart piece by piece. Water gushed everywhere as they broke through, flooding the yard, turning the carefully landscaped area into a muddy disaster. The deep end, the part that encroached most severely onto my property, was demolished systematically. They were careful to stop exactly at the property line, leaving a jagged concrete edge on what remained of their pool. The waterfall feature, which had probably cost thousands by itself, was torn down. The palm trees planted in the encroaching section were removed. Every piece of the pool that sat on my property was destroyed, bit by bit, while I watched from my yard. What was left when they finished was almost comical. The Hendersons had about half a pool, maybe less. The deep end was completely gone, leaving only a shallow remnant that couldn't possibly function as intended. You couldn't dive in it, couldn't really swim in it, couldn't do much of anything with it. The water feature was disconnected and useless. The carefully designed shape that probably looked great in the contractor's planning software was ruined, now just an awkward fragment that served no purpose. They couldn't even repair it easily. To rebuild, they'd need new permits, new surveys, new everything. And this time, they'd have to do it entirely on their own property, which meant basically starting from scratch with a much smaller pool that actually fit within their legal boundaries. A few days later, I watched from my kitchen window as another crew arrived and filled in what was left of the pool. They broke up the remaining concrete, filled the hole with dirt and gravel, compacted it down, and covered it with sod. The Hendersons were cutting their losses completely. $60,000. Gone. Vanished. Because they couldn't be bothered to check property lines, or treat their neighbor with basic respect, or follow the law. Mrs. Peterson stopped by that evening with a plate of homemade cookies. Chocolate chip. Still warm. Marcus. Honey. I heard what happened, she said, settling into my porch chair like we were old friends. Good for you, for standing up for yourself. A lot of people would have just let it go, let themselves be bullied. I just wanted what was right, I said, taking a cookie. That's more than some people want these days, she said with the wisdom of someone who'd seen a lot of neighborhood drama over the years. They thought they could intimidate you into accepting it, thought they could ignore the law because it was inconvenient. I'm glad the judge set them straight. Maybe they'll think twice before pulling something like this again. The Hendersons avoided me completely after that. They'd leave for work early in the morning and come home late at night. No more pool parties, obviously. No more social media posts about their perfect backyard paradise. No more pretending everything was wonderful. They put up curtains on all the windows facing my house, like they couldn't stand to even accidentally see me. 3 months after the pool was filled in, a "for sale" sign appeared in their yard. Good riddance, honestly. Their house sold within 2 months to a young couple with 2 kids who seemed genuinely nice. The husband, Jason, introduced himself properly on the day they moved in, gave me a firm handshake, and one of the first things he mentioned was that they planned to build a deck in their backyard. We're getting a full survey done first, he said. Want to make sure everything is by the book. Smart move, I told him. Your predecessors could have learned from that approach. I used part of the damages payment to landscape that strip of property the Hendersons had violated. Planted a nice row of ornamental hedges right along the property line, with small decorative markers every 10 feet clearly showing the boundary. Not to be spiteful, but to make absolutely sure everyone, current neighbors and future neighbors, knew exactly where the line was. Looking back on the whole situation now, almost a year later, it taught me some important lessons. Always keep your property survey accessible and actually know where your boundaries are. Never let someone bully you into accepting a property violation, no matter how done or expensive they claim it is. Documentation is everything: photos, dates, witnesses, official surveys. My case was airtight because I took the time to document everything properly rather than just getting angrier. But the biggest lesson? Property rights exist for a reason. They're not suggestions or guidelines or things you follow when it's convenient. They're legal boundaries that protect everyone equally. When someone violates those rights, especially after being informed they're in the wrong, the law has remedies. You just have to be willing to pursue them, to stand your ground, to fight for what's rightfully yours. The attorney fees cost me about $8,000 initially, but I recovered all of it in the judgment, plus the $5,000 in damages and the survey costs. More importantly, I protected my property value and established that my boundaries matter. If I'd let the Hendersons get away with it, if I'd been the good neighbor they demanded I be, It could have affected future property sales, created legal complications, and set a precedent that my property was up for grabs for anyone who wanted to build on it. Sometimes, being a good neighbor means standing firm when someone tries to take advantage of you. Real neighbors respect boundaries, literally and figuratively. The Hendersons learned that lesson the expensive way. $60,000 plus legal fees plus damages, all because they couldn't be bothered to spend a few hundred on a survey before building. Their house sold to that nice young family who actually do respect boundaries. The kids play in their properly surveyed backyard. Jason and his wife Sarah wave when we see each other getting mail, and nobody has built anything on anybody else's property. It's amazing how well neighborly relations work when everyone follows the basic rules. A year after everything went down, I actually ran into Greg Henderson at a home improvement store. He was in the lumber section, looking at deck materials, and our eyes met across the aisle. For a second, I thought he might try to start something, might want to have words or make excuses. But instead, he just looked down and walked quickly in the other direction. There was something defeated in his posture, something broken, and I didn't feel satisfaction seeing it. The satisfaction had come from the judge's ruling, from watching the bulldozers fill in that illegal pool, from reclaiming what was mine. That evening, I sat in my backyard, looking at the hedge line that now clearly marked my property boundary. The space was mine again, all of it, properly and legally. I'd learned something valuable through this whole ordeal. Standing up for yourself isn't about being difficult or petty or vindictive. It's about respecting yourself enough to demand that others respect you too. It's about knowing that rules exist for everyone, not just the people who find them convenient. Property lines exist for a reason. Laws exist for a reason. Permits exist for a reason. And judges exist to enforce all of it when someone decides the rules don't apply to them because following them would be inconvenient or expensive. The Hendersons thought they could build their dream pool wherever they wanted, on whoever's land they wanted, and face no consequences. They thought wrong. They gambled $60,000 plus legal fees on the bet that I wouldn't fight back, that I'd just accept their theft of my property because reversing it would be hard for them. They lost that bet spectacularly. Every time I look at that hedge line, I'm reminded that justice isn't always quick and it isn't always easy, but it's worth fighting for. My property is protected. My boundaries are respected. And nobody, no matter how entitled they think they are, can take what's mine without consequences. That's the real ending to this story. Not revenge, not bitterness, not satisfaction in someone else's misfortune. Just simple justice. My land, my rules, my rights protected by law exactly as they should be. The system worked the way it was designed to work, and the people who tried to game that system paid the price. And you know what? I sleep better at night knowing that my property is secure, that I stood up for myself when it mattered, and that the law backed me up when I was right. That's worth more than any pool, no matter how expensive or impressive it might have been. Justice, it turns out, sounds exactly like bulldozers filling in an illegal pool on a bright autumn morning. And, honestly, that's a sound I'll never forget. It's the sound of standing up for yourself, of boundaries being respected, and of the law working exactly as it should. Some people might call me petty for watching that pool get destroyed, but I call it justice. And after everything the Hendersons put me through, after all the stress and legal fees and sleepless nights, I earned the right to see it through to the end. My name's Marcus Hayes, and this is my property. All of it. And that's exactly how it's staying.